Join us on our Discord, the Greater Mandala. For access, sign up to the Order of Fire's mailing list.
This is Jack Donovan, and you are listening to or watching PH2T3R, Politeia, the Journal of Solar Culture. And I'm here, as always, with my co-host, C.B. Robertson, author of many fine books. And so we're here today. We decided to do books 3 and 4 of Plato's Republic. And that was really because as I was reading through book 3, I kind of went into book 4, and it started to come together, what they were saying in book 3. Alone, book 3 almost isn't a complete thought. You know, like there's more. As it gets into like book 4, it's like, okay, I see where you're going with this now. So I was like, well, let's do them together, and that way we can sort of smash this project a little bit so it doesn't take like 10 actual weeks. To get it done. But I mean,
the real reason is it's annoying to listen to these people argue technical details about whether a thirsty person wants drink generally or only good drink. And like, let's condense this slightly.
Yeah. He said that because I was complaining about that today. I'm trying to listen to this as I'm driving in my car, and I'm like, "Shut up about drink already!" God, you know, like there's just a few things, but this is actually also the book where it really gets into the meat of what people think of as the Republic, in terms of the actual city-state and talking about it. So why don't I go follow our pattern that we set last week, and why don't you give me your thoughts on books 3 and 4, like kind of set the scene here, what's going on, because you're good at that.
Well, book 3 is a particularly funny book to me when you go back to it after having read through it a few times, because as we talked about before, that there's the creation of an initial city that gets rejected by Glaucon, if I remember correctly. He says, this is a city for pigs, the city of necessity, where they're like sleeping on branches and stuff. And so they say, we want a city where we have luxuries, where we have nice things, where we can own things and enjoy ourselves and not just be like in the woods eating acorns or whatever. And so like, Socrates is like, okay. And so then they begin the construction of a second city. And we've worked through the Guardian class, and we're spending a lot of time talking about how are we going to educate our Guardian class. And very quickly, we wind up back in a situation very much like necessity, where we have to have very rigid rules that sort of evades all of the nice things we were hoping to have by having a nice city, in order to have a Guardian class that is effective enough to protect us from adversaries and to take things from neighbors, in order to create our city of luxury. But again, it has to be mentioned repeatedly, because the effect of the Republic can be kind of hypnotic. You can get lost in the trees and forget the forest that you're in, which is this search for justice. And we actually get a very helpful reminder in book 4 that after all, like, this whole thing was about finding justice in the individual. Now we have our city. Where is justice here? And I guess some highlights, and the highlight that has to be pointed out, because every class on the Republic, every going over the Republic in an academic context will point this out. There's a lot of time spent both invoking Homer, like Plato is reciting, the characters in the dialogue are reciting bits of Homer verbatim. Like they're clearly extremely familiar with it. And they are arguing in their just city, Homer will have to be censored. And we can't allow our guardians to be hearing these kinds of things. And there's a whole section on how are we going to educate our guardians in music? Well, we can't have this kind of music or that kind of music because they have a certain spirit to them and we want our guardians to be martial and courageous and steadfast. So we're only going to allow these two kinds, and not any of the
And if
rest.
you don't play the correct kind of music, we will anoint you with myrrh and put wool on your head and send you along to another city.
Yeah, praise you as anointed by the gods, and you say, "You're so wonderful. Be wonderful somewhere else." Which is a very funny line. So,
Right.
They've gone through this and they've created their city, except they're not done yet. But they've essentially created their city, and they say, "Now, where is justice?" And they go through some other virtues. We'll say, here is I was just going over it, but they're escaping me at the moment. But like, here's temperance in one case, and here's this other virtue, and here's that. So, sort of by process of elimination, they say, I think Adeimantus jumps forward and he says, "I've got it, justice. It's been right in front of us this whole time. Justice." When we were trying to. He brings back the metaphor of looking at the thing far away. He says, "Justice was right in front of us. It wasn't far away. It was the thing right here." Justice is the principle of doing your own job and not being a busybody, and essentially like everyone doing their own part and not trying to do more than your part. And there is an implication that justice has something to do with a kind of principle of harmony that isn't quite fully developed. That we're still sort of investigating this. Socrates is like, let's investigate to see if this is true, but it's sort of the working belief that they have towards the end of chapter 4, or book 4, I should say.
Right. And, speaking to your point before about like, hey, maybe this isn't Plato actually saying how you should organize a city. It is, they bring it back to, if it's all metaphor, it's bringing it back to, in theory, what he's saying is that you should be a dictator to yourself. Like, you should be a philosopher king to yourself.
Right.
And that's they're really trying to figure out what's best in life and how to live well and how to live justly. And that's kind of what the big part of it. But it is funny that, as you said, that they do joke about how, like, oh, now it seems we're taking things away from their city. Because really they take away... I mean, this is really like an autistic paradise of that they're creating. Is like, well, clearly we can only have one kind of music because and it extends beyond that. It's like there's only certain kinds of subjects that you can paint about. There's only like certain kinds of food. You can't have sweet sauces. Like there's all kinds of things that you can't. It's this puritanical existence.
I think my favorite humorous part is the section on medicine, where they're describing how medicine is going to be done. And they say good medicine is the kind that avoids this horrible ailment called lingering death, where we prolong the experience of sickness for people who don't have good constitutions. Good medicine is really letting people who are not healthy die and get on with it. Is essentially their approach, and it's amusing, and it's one of those little reminders of the tone that they're taking this thing. Your autism point reminded me. I was just doom scrolling Instagram a little bit while I was holding the baby earlier, and I was reminded of the old comedy sketch where the autistic reporter was interviewing an inmate in a prison, and they were talking about, oh yeah, it's really sucks living in here. They make you get up at exactly the same time every day. You're forced to walk everywhere in lines. The work details are tough. You have to stack these boxes, and the autistic person's like, tell me more about waking up at the same time and stacking boxes, and being denied access to other people. This sounds wonderful. The true Plato's Republic in the anyways. Is somewhat reminiscent of that. And we're not at the absolutely most sort of totalitarian elements, but we're getting there. We have a pretty thoroughly autocratic state where everything is controlled primarily by means of education and entertainment and diet and so forth. But it feels like we're beginning to see also in part 4 the transition from the Guardians to the term Guardian actually shifts a little bit. We're no longer calling the warriors Guardians. We're calling the warriors, they're actually auxiliaries. They're not really the Guardians. The true Guardians are sort of ascended warriors. They're warriors who we have tested through temptations of like enchantment and vice and other things, and they pass all these tests that we put them through by a sort of internal resilience and patriotism. And these warriors who pass our tests of their character can be elevated to become sort of the political elites, the sort of ruling caste of the society. And I think this is also the books where we get the gold and the silver and the bronze and the iron constitutions. So we have this noble lie that we're all born of the earth, but some of us, the Earth Mother gives us different metallic constitutions, and the gold constitution is, fit, at least in potential, to be rulers of the society, and then the silver is sort of fit to be our auxiliaries. We're calling them now our warriors, and then what was it? Bronze was like the artisans or something, and then iron was like the laborers, or it was something to that effect. And and of course sometimes gold can give birth to silver and vice versa, and we're all brothers and sisters together, but we're also having kids sometimes, so who knows. We'll get more into that in later books. But they say this noble lie we'll have to tell in order to facilitate everyone getting along with each other. And one of the interesting things is how embarrassed Socrates seems to be, is presented as being in even expressing this noble lie. He says, why do you, like it was Glaucon or Adeimantus, it's like, why are you like hesitating to tell us this thing? It's an embarrassment to have to bring it out of him. There's just an interesting little detail in tone there. But anyways, what were your thoughts aside from enjoying the drinking part?
No, there are a lot of parts obviously like that where I think the biggest part is the discussion about it being a metaphor for the person and not getting in the weeds of the city. Because really, in terms of that city, I mean, you can see really all the mistakes of central planners. all the mistakes of central planning are being revealed in their thinking about the city. If they were actually doing work of statecraft here, which I really don't think, that's not the context of the discussion, is let us figure out what the perfect state is. So, if they were actually trying to do a work of statecraft, you'd think it would be like, let us figure out what the perfect state is. And that's the concept of the discussion, not let us figure out what justice is, or, all those sorts of things. But following their logic in this part of what the state looks like and how it operates, is a central planner's like dream. Like, if I just put everybody in their place and had them do their one job that they're allowed to do, and they're not allowed to change jobs. I'm assuming like once you're a shoemaker, you're a shoemaker. You can't get tired of shoemaking. You can't like have a midlife crisis and want to do something else.
We got to arrange their diet and their entertainment so that they're never tempted to feel sad about their single.
Like they just have an infinite joy in shoemaking that they never want. And some people do have that. I mean, some people get one craft and then they do that. But you, for instance, are not minding your business at all because you are an electrician. And you should not be thinking about philosophy at all. There's really no business. Well, that's for gold people. You're a bronze person.
Which sort of invokes the question: How do Socrates and Glaucon and Adeimantus know so much about music? How do they know so much about the trades and these other things that they're speaking of with a fair bit of knowledge about? How do they know about mathematics and all of these other things that they are invoking in this conversation? It's another one of these fun little contradictions that is almost being invited, because essentially the conclusion of book 4 is like, I've got it. The thing we were after in book 1, we found it. It's justice, and it's everyone doing their own thing and not doing anything else, and not worrying about anything else, which is, of course, exactly what they are doing in the construction of this city, because the job of the philosopher is not to do statecraft. Actually, it's to pursue the truth, which comes a little bit later, and that's not the same thing as statecraft. So there's there are, like, every time you go back through the Republic, more of these contradictions kind of emerge, and they have these kind of, like, it's too on the nose to not be intentional, kind of emphatic, a character will exclaim, here's justice, and it's exactly the opposite of the thing that we're doing in the creation of a city. That level of contradiction that Socrates seems to be inviting, just as he was in book 1 with these extremely dubious equivocation that he was sort of tying Thrasymachus up with. But they get more subtle. They get more, like, sneaky as you progress further into the Republic.
Yeah, and it's in the humorous tone, like you said, obviously makes it that they're half serious. Although the thing is, as we well know, there are many people who do discuss statecraft exactly like this.
Yes,
and and this is the idea. I mean, that's the idea. This is why people, I think, attach it to communism or fascism or whatever ism they want to attach to. But they attached because, I mean, that was the idea of communism. To each according to his need or whatever. Like, and you have your job, you do your job. There are other people do their job. It's all for the big good of the state and whatever, and that's what you do. And that's and there are many people, and that's really what I think a lot of people will probably in Silicon Valley think that the rest of us should do. A lot of our ruling elite right now, like, you'll be happy with what we give you, and you can do with whatever is left. Like, you can do with whatever. There won't be a need for you to do much, so we'll figure out something for you to do.
Yeah, you will have nothing, and you will be happy.
Yeah, exactly. You will have no purpose in life, but somehow you'll be happy.
There's, I can't remember if it's towards the end of book 2 or towards the beginning of book 3, but one of the reasons that is given for the importance of censoring myths is that it's not that these myths can't be edifying. It's not that these myths can't be educational or valuable, but the young guardians, the people who are not intellectually qualified, might not get the right idea, might not get the right understanding out of the myths here. And it feels like a foreshadowing of the tragic fate of Plato himself, who is not just misunderstood in the positive, but is misunderstood in the negative. I'm sure I've mentioned George Soros and the Open Society Foundation in the context of Karl Popper and the Open Society and its enemies. But it's not just him. It's many people in the academy and serious political thinkers. Maybe the best contemporary book in defense of liberalism in the last 20 years is a book called Kindly Inquisitors by Jonathan Rauch. And there's a line in Kindly Inquisitors where Jonathan Rauch says, reading Plato's Republic is this, it's beautiful, but it's terrifying. He says it's like a window into the mind of totalitarianism itself, or something to that effect. And He's a very serious writer, a very well-respected writer, very well-respected defender of liberalism, completely misunderstanding the point, I think, and losing track of the metaphor, and many people have, almost exactly as Plato sort of expressed fear of in the mouth of Socrates in talking about the censorship of myths. So he has these. None of these arguments are direct and straightforward, but there's hints of truth, and he doesn't separate the truth from the falsehood, or from the equivocations, from the tricky wordplay, from the dead ends. So it sort of forces the reader to try to parse that out on their own.
Right.
Which I believe is the intention in educating the youth in thinking for themselves, which is of course the opposite of the totalitarian state they are building.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely not. They're like you are not. They're trying to create. Really, the project that they're talking about is the creation, like the perfection of human nature, according to the state. And that, like I said, that's a lot of what a lot of people believe, that humans are like infinitely plastic, in the sense that they can, which I don't think that Plato believed that they were infinitely plastic.
No, many of his arguments.
A lot of talk about human nature. Yeah,
right.
There's a lot of it.
Many of his arguments sort of hinge upon an acceptance of nature. Like there's that initial sticking point of how will we have guardians who have a conflicting nature? They can't both be like, aggressive towards enemies, but also friendly towards friends if they have one or the other nature. And this was like puzzling. And it was only by finding dogs as an example of a being in nature that is both of these two things at the same time that they say, there is precedence in nature and the possibility in nature for this character we are aspiring to create in our thought experiment.
Which is natural law is always so retarded. It like produces the dumbest arguments. Because you can find all kinds of crazy shit in nature, and like the Catholics like to refer to natural law a lot, and they have a whole doctrine about it. But it's like, well, you don't see this in nature, so it's not natural. But like,
there's penguins.
Parents see people eat their own babies in nature all the time. Like, it's people eat their own babies. Like all kinds of horrible things that you would never want a person to do.
Yeah.
So like it just, but they use it when they want to justify something or prohibit something. But it's not. You can really, in the way that I say that you can find a PhD in a study to support literally any viewpoint that you have. You can also find an animal in nature who exhibits behaviors that you can observe that will support or put down whatever you want to like promote or put down. It's just kind of a ridiculous place to take information from, because we're just talking about humans and human nature, not the nature of animals, because it's very different.
And you can sometimes use the existence of things in nature as inspiration, as like as an explanation of why would this be happening, and as a sort of springboard for exploration, but as there's what's called a naturalistic fallacy, which in philosophy is where you say, because something happens in nature, therefore it is good. And like the go-to counter to that, for me, when I first heard people make that form of an argument, I think it was like a freshman in college or something. It was like, people break their arm in nature, like that's not, and that could be a death sentence in nature. Just because something happens in nature, like obviously that's not good. The example I brought up when conversing with Christians is the wolf is chasing the deer. Like no matter what happens, something is bad for somebody. You know, either the deer is ate, or the wolf does not eat, and maybe its kids starve. You know, so something is bad for somebody here. So, like, because it is natural, therefore it is good. And there are more nuanced versions of it, like we have a right to attempt to do something. Natural rights supposedly follow from natural law, and that is a little bit more nuanced. But than saying, "Oh, dogs do it, therefore it's possible in humans."
Yeah.
But yeah,
it's great as a metaphor. It's great. It's great.
Right.
That's what poetry is, right? I mean, you take things that aren't the thing and you use them as metaphors so that you can explain things and talk about them fluidly. But when you make it as when you use it as justification for something, that's a different thing. Metaphors are a way to help understand something and think about it differently. But the idea, using it as an actual justification as part of your argument, it's also, I mean, you also see this obviously in the fitness space. Everything natural is good. Well, poison is natural. Like rattlesnake poison is natural. Like lots of things that are natural that you shouldn't have too much of, or you shouldn't have it all. And things that we don't even know. Like, I mean, there's this whole list of things that dogs can't have. That you wouldn't think, like grapes. Like what? Grapes? But they're not supposed to have grapes. Just things that seem, plenty of things in nature are bad for you.
Right. The thing that was sort of tweaking my brain a little bit in thinking about all the people who I believe are misinterpreting Plato is, like, if we are to suppose we're to take them a little bit more seriously. We see, I think, towards the end of book 4, an argument for identity based on the impossibility of a single being doing two contradictory actions. And it has the initial appearance of a just kind of linguistic argument, like, oh, you wouldn't say that someone is pushing and pulling at the same time. That's not like a proper sentence. What you would say is they're pushing with one hand and pulling with another hand. But the argument is a little bit more subtle, and it feels as though Socrates is moving towards a sort of axiomatic argument for identity based upon the impossibility of one thing doing two contradictory actions, which the cleverness of this is like out of this world, because it ties in with their notion of justice, of the principle of one person doing only one job and creating a harmonious state based upon this principle. But you can see it sort of laying the groundwork for an argument for the forms that is to come later. The pure idea, which is more real than the material expression of the concept of the thing. The classic example being the idea of a chair being more real than the chair. And the build up to it kind of does make it seem sort of serious in some ways. And you can begin to see why the Platonists or Neoplatonists take it as perhaps Plato's actual position and not merely as just a metaphor. I don't.
Do you mean the forms, or?
Well, yes, the forms and the sort of build up that we're seeing to it in the conclusion of book 4 with this argument about of finding identity through the impossibility of a single thing doing two things at once. It's sort of a definitional argument. What did you think of that? Did you think it was like compelling, or did it come across still as just them having fun with words and doing wordplay in the context of the metaphor?
Well, no, obviously, I mean, everything they're doing for a reason. But listening to it sounds like irritating nonsense. But it sounds like people you would, if they were talking at a bar, you'd be like, I gotta go. You guys are annoying. I gotta go. But and they are talking at a bar basically, like they're sitting around a table talking, and you're just like, that's the point. I would have been like, yeah, guys, I got a drink. I'll see ya. You guys like work this out, kind of the way that like when people used to talk about Graham Hancock around the fire at Waldgang, they go down this. What if 10,000 years ago, and they'd start arguing about it for like 30 minutes. Like, I gotta go. You guys are boring. But no, I mean, in terms of, I for reasons that we already stated, I really don't, obviously the idea of one person being only one thing is very, very limiting. And I mean, in certain contexts, identity is about, and I guess I've written a lot about identity over the years, but I mean, you do have to pick teams sometimes. Like what is what is your identity? What are you about? What do you actually believe? I mean that you have to sometimes not be two opposite things.
Yeah.
You have to make a choice, because the people who are in the middle all the time, they just go the way the wind blows. Yeah. You really can't trust them, and they'll just kind of become whoever they need to be. Right. They're just surviving. Which is kind of feminine, really. But it's I think that there's so much, a lot of what we talked about in terms of human nature is that there are so many aspects of it. And and a fullness of life in the way that we talk about in solar idealism. These guys are basically, they really don't care about the Lord of the Earth people. They care about the strikers and the Father. Yeah, and that's kind of what they're carrying. They talk about the regular people, but the regular people were just kind of props to be there. Right. Like they should do their little things, live their little lives and make nice shoes or something, But also, I mean, that is the richness of human life that I think when people and guys tend to do this, because we tend to gravitate towards more striker or father characteristics.
The higher status roles.
Yeah, the higher status roles, and also like they're more exciting. Like warrior or king, like shoemaker. Like there's one is much more exciting, and so men tend to gravitate towards that, and they kind of forget about these other things. But in the same way that I've argued for, kind of an American James Bond kind of mentality to masculinity that they have in Europe, which is why we have James Bond in Europe. But in America, a lot of guys, there's a puritanical element where you have to be a warrior and just think about warrior things. And being a man is just thinking about warrior things.
Whereas James Bond is a warrior, but also can drive really well. He can dance. He can play cards. He can navigate a airplane, and like is a bit of a jack of all trades.
Well, and he can feel comfortable in and move through these different environments that are more of the earth. Like in terms of like realms of pleasure, and so do gets laid all the time. He doesn't, he's not worried about like I have to be only focused on. He's like, oh well, you're hot, secret agent lady. I'm gonna bang you and take your gun away. But but he can experience life and make up a cocktail on the fly and do all these things and appreciate a fine suit and all these things that I think that American men have lost in many ways because we don't. I always say it's because we don't have a nobility.
So he'd be a very bad guardian. He'd be a very bad guardian in our just city.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, like James Bond is not allowed. He does everything wrong for a guardian. Their guardians are just like these kind of Captain America characters,
or robots.
Like the Guardian. Yeah, or robots. I mean, that's really what they want is robots. They're settling for people, but if they could have envisioned robots, that would have been preferable because they would just do their job and not meddle in anybody else's business. you know, because I think that is also humorous, that because they belabor that point good, and obviously that's something about the translation too. I mean, I don't know how maybe it's phrased differently or comes across differently in Greece, but they belabor the point of like, you know, an ordered society and is you know, just life is about minding your own business. And don't be meddling in other people's business and mind your own business. And I think that's kind of funny in itself. You know, like and there's something to be said for that as advice in modern life. You know, like
but it feels
fucking business, but
it feels unsatisfying though, and it feels like Socrates is maybe understating his skepticism when he says, "Yes, this sounds good. Let's investigate it to make sure that's really the justice we're seeking." It feels like that's an understated way of saying you haven't found it yet. So, but you know, we'll find out in the coming books. But the thing that I'm reminded of when we talk about, you know, the just man has only one job is, you know, we're building to the tripartite notion of the soul, which is pretty influential in the order. I mean, it's part of the, you know, Fire in the Dark. And implicit in the tripartite soul is a man is not one person. The idea of a man only having one job is actually impossible according to human nature as understood by the Republic, because we have a reasoning capacity, we have this spirited thumos, and we have our desires and our appetites, and these sort of castes that we've constructed in our just city are just representations of these things. And the fact that each person is supposed to only do their one thing in the context of the harmony of the whole, you know, the non-applicability of only doing one thing, when you remember the metaphor in the context of this tripartite notion of the soul that we're building up to, becomes, I think, unavoidable. I don't think there's any way to salvage a literalist reading of the Republic, which you discovered is not the true proper translation of Politeia, or was that the correct Greek name?
I think so. I think something like that. Yeah,
it's like the state or something like that.
It's polis, and then there's some. It's extracted. I put it on the Instagram. It's extracted from some longer word that they'd be like, I am a citizen in the city, and so it's like being in the state almost. You know, something like that.
So, yeah, it seems implied. You know, a properly functioning human individual, he hasn't destroyed his desires. He hasn't, as Curtis Yarvin suggests, killed his thumos, but he has, you know, reined it in to some degree. But it's still giving him spirit and energy, and the desires are still driving him to sustain his body, you know, at the very least. And there's a harmony of these different natures, which we could perhaps imagine might be extrapolated into a harmony in skills that one acquires over one's life. Skills that work together in harmony. You're not only doing one job, you are perhaps doing many jobs. You know, how could you be a father without also being, you know, a bit of a cook, a bit of a daycare person, a bit of a handyman? How could you be a warrior with also being, you know, also a bit of a cartographer, also a little bit of an electronics repairman if your radio goes down, you know? And like, there's all these skills that augment each other, and that are not just strength additives, but strength multipliers when conjoined together, and that flesh out the context of any one skill, so that you actually almost couldn't do any one skill well without some knowledge of things outside of your area of expertise. Who knows of England who only England knows, as the saying goes.
Right. Well, I mean, especially in modern life right now, I mean, with so many things, yes, there are people who specialize in just the one thing. And that's, you know, that is possible. But I mean, like, I think of all I do is multitask. Like, all I do is, like, I do, like, oh, I'm going to design the books, and now I have to learn about marketing, and now I have to do, like, to do all these things. I mean, and I guess if you build it out in the way that they build the state, if I actually had a company with a lot of employees, then other people would do some of those things.
Right.
And that's, that would be cool. But, to get started, a lot of people have to do everything. And
Right.
that's the way a lot of businesses start and so forth.
Well, and even beyond just getting started. So I was out at a parking a car lot today. We were putting in a service for a car lift, so they can have one of those ad things where there's a car that's high up in the air. We're putting in power for that. We're going to bring the utility out to drop the service line in there probably next week at some point. But the technicians who go out, who install this stuff, are often also times the guys who are doing the bids. They're saying that they're doing the sales for it. And a funny thing happens when you start to separate the people who do the install work from the sales and the bidding side too much. You get people doing bids that are completely unrealistic, that have no idea what's actually going in to the work, and they can't bid accurately because they don't know things outside of their own domain, because these domains actually intersect and connect with each other. In a city, we are not living alone. We're interacting with each other. How would I know the difference between a good shoe and a bad shoe? Besides, that's not a good analogy. That was a false start of an example there. But basically, like, you actually can't function in a city, in a state, in a republic like the one we're building, without some knowledge outside of your domain. At least that's been my own experience in the trades and sales and other places.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's like managers who don't understand the jobs of the people that they're managing is a good example, which happens a lot. And sometimes they can do that, and sometimes they can't. And there's a lot of things where you have to know more than one thing. I mean, if you're going to be an artisan today or an artist, really, you have to actually understand marketing. That's how the world works. People don't. There used to be people that would do that for you, and there are still in certain circles. But if you're going to be a good professional photographer, you have to. There's all kinds of stuff you have to do that had nothing to do with photography, and a lot of it's sales. A lot of it's sales, and a lot of it's like dealing with clients and advertising and making reels and getting it, like whatever, all the stuff that you have to do to make that happen. Yeah. So, and the other thing I was thinking about as we were talking about, the art issue, is that I don't think these guys can actually create art. Like the society the society that they're creating can't create art.
No,
it has to edit Homer.
Yeah.
It has to edit art, but it can't create. And it can't create because it can't create a plot, because nothing bad can happen.
This is like asking ChatGPT to tell a funny joke. Like, it has banned itself from all funny things because it doesn't want to risk offending anybody. Or at least, most people, certain protected people. So it's like
you'll probably get how the chicken crossed the road or something like that.
You'll get Republic art would be like chat, or art's a bad example. Republic humor would be like ChatGPT humor.
Well, it would be. It's actually a problem that I've seen on the right or whatever, of the not left, I think is the best way to say it. Of the not left, is that there's a problem with art creation because there's a desire to be extremely didactic, and I struggle with it too. I mean, like it's the place that you have to go to create really moving drama or something like that is not I want to tell a message about how things should be, and that's what people want to create art that tells a message about how things should be.
Right.
And that's why the art fails. And you see that too. Actually, a really big place where you see that is in like Christian art. Like Protestant, especially Protestant, because Catholics made great art because Catholicism is weird and it's kind of torture porn, and there's, and then you get on these weird hellscapes, and there's so much like pain and suffering in Catholicism that they're good at that. The passion, I mean, that's what really passion is, I think. It's Catholic, but the Protestant kind of like closed down puritanical version. They make terrible art. Like they really aren't good at, like Christian wholesome television or Christian music or whatever. It's very difficult to make it good. It can't be. It's compelling.
There's a Marxist podcast I used to listen to. I should listen to them again, called Chapo Trap House, and every once in a while they would review movies, and they would review sometimes these like C-tier, low-budget Christian movies. Those reviews were the masterpieces of entertainment. And they were fun because occasionally they would review movies from the right, or from the not left, as you would put it. Like they reviewed the new Top Gun Maverick, and they said, we want to dislike it, but it's really good. Like it's really good. It's totally industrial, military industrial complex propaganda, and it's really well done, and it's really good. So they were honest on that artistic side. But the reviews of those, like you say, the didactic Christian moralizing movies were just incredible. Better works of art than the art they were critiquing.
Yeah, I mean, what you get out of that is generally quaint. Yeah, what it is, it's just quaint. It's like this is nice. Like this is not. It's not compelling. It doesn't make you scared or excited or upset or whatever. It's like, oh, this is nice. This is a story about a happy family who had a slight problem but then fixed it with Jesus, and everyone lived happily ever after. And it's like, that's not really a compelling story. That's not exciting. You need more war or death or sex or like all the things that all those Lord of the Earth things. You need this kind of carnal humanity in it, and that's the stuff that in the Republic that they want to take out. Any sadness, and you can't. There's no lamentation. There's only obviously then only certain kind of music could be in your movie. You can't have sad things.
You're not allowed to tell stories that might imply that death is bad, that the underworld might be an unpleasant place.
Yeah, I actually at the very beginning when I was reading that, that's let me see if I have notes on that, because I thought that was interesting. That they had to basically rewrite what Hades is. Mm-hmm. And that Hades is a lovely place, and it's going to be fantastic. Because if you tell them that it's a bad place, then they won't want to die, and they need to be able to die so that they can be warriors. So you have to tell them, and that's very interesting because actually a lot of ancient cultures had the realm of the dead being not altogether fantastic. I mean, if you, I believe the Mesopotamian one, like Sumerian one or whatever, is super weird, where they sit on the ground with feathers or something, and it's not appealing. And then obviously Hades always comes across as being just lesser, like just
in that section,
dim version of reality. Yeah.
In that very section, they quote the Odyssey as an example of something they'll have to censor. They say, we couldn't have our heroes saying, like Achilles, I would rather be a servant to a tenant farmer than king among the dead. We can't have our warriors hearing that from Achilles, which is one of the most potent lines in the Odyssey, when Odysseus is descended to the underworld, as they descended the beginning of this story. To speak with Tiresias and other dead people. So the I think one of the other things that stuck out to me in reading through this is, for all the talk that they give about censoring Homer, and we're going to hear more of it soon too. We already have some reasons. We're about to get more reasons to censor Homer. Man, they're quoting Homer a lot, and they're putting in this text, in this dialogue, all of the lines that they say people shouldn't hear. So at a like fourth wall level, the Republic would not be very good at creating its own guardians if they're presenting the reader with all of these, all of the lines that they think people shouldn't be hearing, right. and presenting the characters as knowing basically by heart. So it's in many ways further immortalization of the lines to put them there. That was my own thought. Anyways.
Yeah. I mean, is it a... I'm just trying to think of ancient worlds and their ideas of the afterlife.
Yeah.
And this idea that we have to want to die because it's going to be fantastic in heaven. This is kind of, it's kind of leaning towards that, which obviously the Christian version, or I don't know I only know about the virgins that you're supposed to get if you're do jihad stuff. I don't know how the regular heaven is supposed to work for in Islam, but you probably know. You did a minute with that, didn't you?
I dove deep into Islam about 10 years ago. I came to my conclusion, and then I've gradually forgotten and let go of the rest of it. I have very little interest in going back into that. Right. It's to be a little bit crass in quoting Hitchens, it's essentially a plagiarism of Christianity, in many ways. Many parts of it, he claims, are almost verbatim plagiarizations of the Bible. The 72 virgins does seem to be original, so it's got that going for it.
That's spicy.
The Bible heaven is basically just like a concert of praise and adoration. I think it's
also very boring.
There's a way you can make it better. You could say, oh no, it's like connection at this more abstract level. The Greek notion of the afterlife seems to be to the degree that there's a focus on it at all. I mean, I think your description of it as this kind of weird place where there's not really much going on. It seems to be a poetic depiction of just non-existence, and I think that is what Homer might be attempting to convey in Achilles, saying, King of the Dead is worse than a tenant farmer among the living. Non-existence is worse than existence, which is life affirming.
Well, it seems as if, just the impression I've gotten from reading things like the Odyssey and so forth are the idea that, Hades and places like that are almost like an eternal loop. Where people really just go over their lives. They're still worried about the beefs that they had in their lives and the things that went on there. They haven't evolved and been moved on. I'm interested in new things now that I'm in the afterlife. It's like they just care about all the things that happened during the small period in which they were alive forever. It seems like, which seems hellish in its own way.
Yeah, there's a funny. Well, I should mention before I go on a digression. The depiction we see in the Republic of the underworld, as depicted by Homer, is no one in the underworld has mind. They have kind of this flitting shade form that's like smoke, and they're recognizable as shadows of their former selves, which might be, a kind of symbolic prelude to some other stuff we're going to see in book 7, but there's no mind there. There's no consciousness. And I mean, it brings Doug Frame to mind, and the idea of nostos as a and its etymological relation with nous, which is mind, and the connection to the Proto-Indo-European notion of a return to light and life, and a being saved from death is homecoming, and mind is the opposite of death in some regard. But there's a TV show that my wife and I really enjoyed, called The Good Place. It's a Ted Danson show that's about these characters who died and they go to an afterlife. And it's a comedy, but also kind of weirdly a philosophy tour. They talk about different ideas. There's trolley problems and so forth, but they wind up after a very long, arduous odyssey through different places in the afterlife. They wind up in a kind of heaven, but everyone is slowly going crazy and becoming stupid because there's nothing to do. They've ridden all the unicorns. They've had all the drinks. They've talked with all the people for 10,000 years. And there's nothing left to do. And so they're just slowly losing their mind and becoming zombies that can't think or do anything. And the thing that saves there's plot spoilers here, so for anyone who's interested in the show, earmuffs or whatever. The thing that saves them is they decide to alter the afterlife, and they create a door into non-existence, so that people can choose to leave forever and to become.
They can have youth. The cure for the afterlife is euthanasia.
Yeah. Well, this is the funny joke that Christopher Hitchens used to, I'm bringing him up a lot now, used to make about Christianity as opposed to North Korea. He said, at least in North Korea, you can fucking die and leave. They said, whereas with Christianity, the party never ends. You're never allowed to leave the party, no matter how much you want to go. For Jack Donovan, you're trapped listening to Arimontis and Socrates argue about what thirstiness actually means forever. and but the what they depict in The Good Place is when they add the door, when they add the possibility, it creates the perception of limited time. Because it turned out the problem wasn't that they were living forever, but that there was no meaning to anything they did because they had eternity in front of them. But if you create the possibility of an exit, the possibility of a terminus, suddenly the things you do take on a meaning that they didn't have before. And people became motivated to become a master carpenter, to learn new skills, to learn how to paint, to learn how to throw white tie parties and these other kinds of skills from each other and so forth. And occasionally one might go through the door, but it was just the possibility of the door changed the experience of what was still essentially eternity. But I think even there, just as the Republic was metaphor for an individual, I think their afterlife was maybe a metaphor for this life. And then maybe death actually, maybe eternal life isn't something worth striving for because infinity is a really long time and it has implications about the value of things we're doing and how motivated we might be to do things.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it's one of those things.
It's all speculative.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, but it's interesting to think of the different ways that that heaven is perceived, and because there's, if you would actually if you're reading the texts and whatever as you've done, you would get one impression, and then most people, it's like where you go to meet all your friends and the people who died, and you get to be like get along with them and have fun again. And that's how most people like to imagine it. I think, like I'm gonna see grandma again. Like she's gonna make me cookies just like she used to.
Finally, how you describe the depiction of the eternal loop. You're going back and doing the things that you did.
Yeah,
before.
grandma's stuck making cookies for like all of infinity. Like so she better fucking like it.
I don't know if we're gonna have time to do it in this stream, but one of these streams we should bring Nietzsche into the podcast, because Nietzsche had a lot of interesting things to say about Plato. Not all very positive, but I think we're touching on his notion of eternal return, and perhaps there might even be a criticism of Nietzsche in his understanding of what Plato was doing, which is it's a very heavy thing to do, to criticize Nietzsche. I think a lot of people criticize Nietzsche very flippantly without a lot of understanding of what he's doing.
I don't know that Nietzsche understood what he was doing. I mean, like all the time.
Yeah. Well,
he's just a guy.
That's true.
Yeah. I mean, he was exploring ideas and moving through ideas. You can see like there's a progression of like moved from this thing to that thing, whatever. Yeah. And who knows where he would have gotten to if he hadn't gotten to, if he hadn't gone crazy, where would he have been 10 years from there? Right. He would have probably been in a totally different place. I don't think that's why I always say, like, when people try to, maybe it's more like the Republic than not, in the terms of like people always try to make things that Nietzsche say into like a prescription for living.
Into a system.
Into a system. And in most of what he's doing is like talking about questioning things. He's talking about like, take that apart. Where does it come from? Like, why do you believe that? Like, who makes those rules? Is that real? Where does that, is that really, what is morality? Like, where does morality come from? And people want to turn it into all these things. Nietzsche said you should do this, and Nietzsche said you should do that. And I'm like, Nietzsche, I think, wanted you to think, and think way the fuck outside of the box. Which is what he was really good at. But I don't think he had like advice for living a successful life.
He might have lived.
How would he know?
Life. He might have lived a different life if he had good advice, positive advice on that. It's still an interesting take, because I think there's a very positive view you'll hear of Plato and Platonism sometimes in academic philosophy. You'll see Neoplatonists in like universities sometimes, but you'll also see positive things said about Plato within Christianity. And what you see in Nietzsche is a kind of negative connection between those two things. I think he at one point calls Christianity as Platonism for the masses. And implicit in that allegation is the idea that Plato was not just building a metaphor when we're talking about the just city, or maybe the just city is a metaphor, but the forms in the allegory of the cave are not. There he's being serious, perhaps. And so that's why, in this reading through, the talk about the identity of a thing being something that cannot do two things at the same time, that felt a lot less playful. That felt a lot more technical than a lot of the stuff that we've been seeing up to that point. There's this growing sense that maybe we're not just messing around anymore. Maybe we're building up to something serious here. And we'll see how it plays out over the coming weeks. But I can see why people might lose track of book one and sort of forget the context that we're having this whole discussion within. And why they might take not just a Straussian view, but a sort of super Straussian view that, he he is, as Adimantus said, what he's advocating was right in front of us this whole time. He was hiding it behind hiding it. It was a double fake out, and he's telling us exactly what he thinks, disguised as a metaphor. So, it's
that gets into like Gnostic weirdness. You like, at that point, that's where or like biblical weirdness, or what like
it can become
what he really meant is that like you find out what there's all these people like we will drill down. That becomes one of those annoying conversations that I walk out of the room on. Is like no, what this person who I've never met really meant was this, and this is the really true truth of it. And it also happens to like serve my worldview and all the thing that I'm trying to get across. Which we all do that a little bit, but
it can devolve into a Sicilian logic puzzle with iocane powder really quick. Which you wouldn't have put the glass here because man is mortal, so you would keep the glass as far away from you as possible. But you would know I would know that, so you would put the glass in front of you. But you would know that I know that, and then you're just like, all right, so make your choice.
Yeah.
And
I think exactly. That's
if my take on Plato is correct, that he is trying to get you to think for yourself by giving these tricky things, and that Nietzsche, who is also misunderstood, and people are trying to say is like, we'll create a Nietzschean system of Übermensch monarchy or whatever, is also really trying to get you to think for yourself. Wouldn't it be funny if Nietzsche misunderstood Plato, who is also just trying to get people to think for themselves? And at the end of the day, you shouldn't take our word for it either. We're just two guys, messing around with this very ancient conversation ourselves. So we might be misconstruing it. Who knows?
That's true. Yeah. I mean, certainly. I mean, I've read through it, several times over the years, like in bits and pieces. But this is probably my first. Well, I won't say the first. I'm pretty sure I read it cover to cover, but like probably 10, 15 years ago, and would have a totally different frame for it now. Different man, different water, whatever, than that. But
yeah.
So I mean, it's a really fresh read through for me. So I don't have the background that you have on it. But yeah, I mean, it's not definitive by any means, but I think we're making reasonable points. And that's as it comes back to, you have to decide what a reasonable man is and whether or not we're being reasonable. But yeah, I mean, I think it's just, it's a way to jump off and talk about this big book that, is, foundational for many things, but also to talk about some of these ideas, like what is identity and what is justice, and like why would you not want a society built like that, and what are the problems that creates, and and it is. I actually saw. It's so irritating to be nuanced because then people like things to be packaged in this tight little way. For them, but like this is all very nuanced stuff. Like, I mean, I saw some some pages that a younger person was creating like videos today, and they were good, some of them, and cool. They've been doing it for a while. Obviously, we've gotten pretty popular with it, but it's like packaging a lot of Nietzschean stuff like into like, here's what you want, like here's what Nietzsche said that you should do. And it's like, well, it's not. I don't know that I've read enough of that about that to. I love reading Nietzsche. He's like my favorite person to read. But I don't know that he has a prescription for your life.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, he's thought provoking, and one gets the sense reading Nietzsche that every subject is right on the cusp of being extremely interesting and counterintuitive. Like, it feels like the things he says, the sorts of questions he asks, make you question everything and open up an entire new world of possibilities of different ways of approaching certain subjects. And I think that's what makes him so exciting to read. And he does it so concisely. He's just so punchy.
Yeah.
And my feeling reading through the Republic is something like the opposite, but it's the same experience, but in a constructive rather than destructive manner. Like, look how far we could go on this one principle. What if every one person had one job, and then this whole city explodes out of it? And it's ridiculous, you know, in a lot of ways. It's absurd, but they don't let the ridiculousness stop them from seeing where it goes. Whither the argument goes, there we follow, as they say.
Yeah.
And
whereas when you said destructive, go ahead. I mean, yeah, sorry.
Oh, right. I mean,
Yeah.
he's essentially creating a whole world here, which is not the world that we live in, obviously.
Right.
And it makes things seem interesting. Like there's so many possibilities we hadn't considered or anticipated.
Yeah. The thing where I thought you were going with the destructive part was, I think with Nietzsche, some of his best, and this is the problem. Some of the best stuff is criticism. Mm-hmm. Some of his best parts. I mean, like despisers of the body and like preachers of death, and like when he's criticizing society is when he's like that. That's when he's on the money. At least for me. And then but as a prescriptive thing, that's always harder.
Yeah.
And also sometimes not as exciting. Because
right.
And this is the same problem that we have with art in Plato's world is that okay, you can only talk about good things, and you can only talk about have it accompanied by certain kinds of music, and you can only and you end up getting that thing that's very quaint and very boring. Really,
if I were to explain how to build a building, you begin with the foundation. You have to talk about grading. You have to talk about the materials and erosion levels. You have to talk about the material, the cost of material, the code requirements for all the different trades that go into this building, and the amount of time it takes, the money it takes, all the inspectors that have to come through. Like just listing off the things required is already boring. You know what's really exciting is a Molotov cocktail. It's really exciting to destroy things because it's really fast to destroy things. Building things is slow and tedious. Yes. It takes effort. So it feels like, and here I think with this juxtaposition in mind, we can see a bit of Plato, the artist, and also perhaps Plato, the hypnotist, in that book one was essentially an act of destruction. We saw Socrates basically not with a single dagger thrust, Nietzsche style, but with a fencer's death by 1,000 cuts of Thrasymachus. Just you're watching the destruction of someone in an argument, and they're fighting left-handed. They're not even bringing their A game to it. So it's interesting to see the opening of this act of destruction, but Thrasymachus' challenge. Many can destroy, but few can offer their own answer. Many can criticize, but few can answer. So I won't take you, Socrates, just asking questions without giving an answer of your own. And Socrates tears him down. We get the fireworks of Socratic questioning at its most destructive and amusing. It's actually entertaining to see. But then that's maybe not satisfying, and so now we have this arduous build up, and it's kind of seamless. We have a couple myths that draw us in. This myth of Gyges. We have the stories about that we're going to tell our guardians, and the myth of us all coming from the earth has its own kind of aesthetic telling to it. So he's drawing us into this creative kind of direction, which is tedious, compared to the fireworks of destruction. But
I was just checking to see if anybody we had any comments down there.
Yeah, we have Mick Tuba saying, quiet chat tonight. Yes, it is. Braden says, hi, first time watching live. Just want to say hi. Hello, Braden. Bert says, always good stuff here.
Yeah. I mean, like we said, we were a little concerned. We were like, are we going to lose a bunch of our guys by just talking about Plato's Republic for 10 weeks or something like that. But it just seemed like a good project to work through, and I'm getting a lot of it. I mean, obviously, I'm going to walk away with a lot more. I mean, obviously, not everyone's going to do all the reading that we do.
Right. But hopefully, this can be a kind of playlist for people who do take an interest in it and can go back to, maybe you're trying to homeschool your high schooler and you don't trust what the public schools are going to say about Plato. So it's like, oh, here's some supplementary takes. I mean, I only heard about Borges because of a podcast, and it was Tamara Summers and David Pizarro going through like 4 or 5 of his short stories. They're absolutely fantastic and also worth reading, by the way, for not just the beauty of their writing, but for the intense philosophical complexity of his stories. He has one story about for example, a library full and nearly infinite library full of every possible book of every possible combination of letters that is 484 pages long. So every book is 484 pages and it has every possible combination of letters, the vast majority of which are, of course, nonsensical. But I mean, every novel of that length that could exist also exists. So there's a kind of question, is there any knowledge in this library? Because for every book that contains true information, there's, dozens and dozens or thousands of books that are exactly the same book, but with one letter altered or with completely different arguments or conclusions. So it's a trippy thing to think about. Are even the true things knowledge anymore, set within the context of this library? And he has thousands of others like that. But I think these kinds of podcasts and commentaries and read-throughs can not just introduce people to them, but help them sort of see the points that they might not have grasped or at least been on the lookout for otherwise. And maybe will help people get to an even higher level of understanding than we're getting through. We wouldn't be where we are without people like, Michael Segru or right. Greg Nage. And right. I think I listened
to Michael Segru's talk on these books today. That was like part of my process of doing this.
Oh, he's such a great speaker.
See what he takes. Let me see what he takes away from that. What I'm supposed to be getting from here, and then obviously you look at the Wikipedia thing on. Okay, well, like that's what I'm supposed to get out of this right here. Okay, and then you also see. Then you have your own observations as you're actually listening to it, and reading it. But right. It gives you without all that, it would be a much harder project. Really.
Oh yeah.
You need some of that actual that's serving the purpose of a teacher. And, hopefully, if people enjoy listening to podcasts. I'm always amazed. People probably find this weird, but I don't really listen to podcasts at all, except for stuff like this. There's like a purpose where I'm doing it, but I don't sit around and listen to podcasts ever. So I'm like, people listen to when people say like, oh, he did a great 3-hour series. I'm like, who does that? But people do. People love that shit. I just don't do it myself.
I do.
I know you do. Yeah.
Last September and October, I was painting bathrooms. I listened to Brett Robbins on repeat, teaching the Apology in Greek. It was pretty cool, actually. Nice. There's all kinds of great stuff out there, and and it's not for everybody, obviously, but if we're going to keep philosophy boring, then like for the few people who take an interest in it, and if there are few, what's the Henry V line? The fewer men, the greater share of honor, or how's the saying goes?
Yeah.
What man would have it so to go back to England and your football games or whatever?
Yeah.
By all means,
one of the things
depart.
I was thinking about today was because we were talking about changing some things in the first man group in terms of structurally, in terms of like what platform we're using and that kind of thing, and I always put out there about, I'm like, I wanted to eventually I'm going to ask him like, wait, what do you think of the show? Because I mean, the first man helped pay for this, so that we could do it. It kind of comes out of dues, and so this is also the big conversation that is part of the first man in the Order of Fire. I mean, I was thinking about it, Carl, today. The Order of Fire is basically the movement, like the Solar Idealist movement as a whole. It's like the brand of the movement. And then the first men is our inner group of the guys who are really taking part of this. And a lot of our guys, like we have guys who are taking a meeting. They do their Thursday night meeting when we do our live show, but then they listen to this later. And cool. we have a lot of guys who listen to this later or whatever, and are taking part in this discussion because we're really not just talking about Plato, but also trying to slowly uncover what we believe as a group and what solar idealism, what the solar idealist take on is on all this stuff. And so it's more of this is kind of our peak conversation about that. And then, when we take other input from the other guys and they talk about things they like. It was also, I had made a note in my notes that I should bring up that when Ed is talking about the Ramayana, that was one of our things that we mentioned. There's tons of crying in the Ramayana. In the same way that there is in Homer, they'd have to take out, and it's interesting because all the heroic literature, but it's like Rama's father is just bawling forever. When he realizes he has to exile his son, and there's a lot of the emotion that they would notch down in Plato's perfect city state or whatever. So I mean, all these ideas from these different things that we're reading and going through and exploring do weave into each other a lot and are creating a bigger perspective, which is kind of the whole project of solar idealism. Like, let's not like focus on these one thing. Like I was doing Germanic paganism, let's get down to a crazy nerd level about what Odin's meant in this line of a thing. In the book worship kind of biblical kind of thing. And you can do that and then have people argue about what Hamangi really means and all the stuff from this in this specific frame. But what we're doing is looking at this big picture and finding all the through lines. And the people crying in epics is probably a through line that is a small kind of funny one, but there are a lot of through lines, and so we're kind of like pulling all these philosophical threads together and making our own thing. I think which is the kind of the big purpose of solar idealism, not to be an expert on any necessarily one thing, but to see all these things and have a more holistic view of masculinity and philosophy and all those things. So I think that's kind of the purpose of what we're doing. So I hope the other guys are enjoying this and getting into it as well, and because it's part of what they're supporting, is to do this. So it'd be cool if we had like 3 or 4 shows that aren't just you and me. Like the other people. Maybe we'll have that someday. Maybe they'll have more funnier shows than ours. I don't know, but people like funny shows on YouTube. I don't know, but
they do. That's already a fairly saturated market. We got Joe Rogan and his whole freaking spec ops team of comedians that he brings on from time to time.
That's true.
Maybe people chuckle. There's all kinds of niche markets. there's a whole YouTube universe of gun people doing gun stuff. We've got a few gun people. I am an absolute amateur. I enjoy it. I barely know what I'm talking about, though. I just like spectating.
You're at a fairly, at least at an intermediate nerd level.
I'll
You know a lot more than me.
I'll take intermediate.
Yeah.
But we have some like actual experts.
Yeah.
And then there's like comedy stuff.
I'm hiking with one tomorrow, and he hasn't even participated in the gun chat yet. But he's the actual sniper. I'm going hiking with Ryan tomorrow.
Awesome.
But we're gonna have tomorrow we're gonna do this hike. I forget what it's called. Flatiron is what it's called. It's like one of the hardest hikes in the state.
Nice.
It's only 95 degrees. I mean, we wanted to get it before the hot season starts. But it's like one of these. I did 3/4 of it once before, and it's one of those where the last mile is actually just bouldering. So it seems like it's not far, but it's very far because you're just like you're actually climbing and crawling at that point. So, but it takes you up to the point where you basically can see the whole like Phoenix area, which is not normally the hike I like to go for, but it's kind of what you look at, the mountain that you're on is the cool one. Yeah, like it's the Superstition Mountain, so like it's really cool. Weird looking. But so we're doing that tomorrow, so I'm excited for that. But cool.
McTubis says, if you nerd out about it, they will come. Yeah. Well, there is a sense in which that's essentially what Plato did, and he essentially created the obsession with philosophy with this book. Imagine if he had obsessed over something else with this degree of intensity and depth and artistic interweaving of different themes together in this sort of hypnotic piece of content. And what do you even call a Platonic dialogue? It's this is one of the things that Nietzsche struggled with. Is like it's not like didactic philosophy, but it's not like a tragedy either. It's this weird mixture of art and argumentation that is not quite polemic, but not quite tragedy. And when it's done well, it has its own sort of artistic quality to it. Though it's very hard to do well. There are people who try to do dialogues. It was one of the things that got Galileo in trouble, actually. He was presenting his idea of the heliocentric model. He wrote it in a dialogue, and he had a priest be one of the antagonists in the dialogue, and he put some just absolutely stupid arguments in the mouth of the priest. And the Catholic Church at the time was like, look, we're not mad at you for your views, but you can't make us look retarded like this. And that was one of the things that got him in trouble. So
that's funny.
Yeah, it's hard to do well. And I think that's one of the things I like about the Republic is like Plato seems to, contra Bap and that crowd, Plato seems to not agree with Thrasymachus. But boy, does he make the Thrasymachus position seem strong, and fairly forceful, and maybe even more compelling in at least in book one.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, yeah. We won't go to that place. That's for inside conversation. But laughing about the events of the week. But anyway. But yeah. Anyway, guys, I think we can wrap the show up there. That's about right. Did you say next week you're going to be in Kentucky? Is that right?
Yes. I should still be able to dial in and chat. We'll have to play it by ear, but
okay.
We'll get more information on that around Tuesday or Wednesday.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
I think Wednesday is the gym trip day, so we'll get to hang out with Nathan, hopefully.
Oh, cool. That'd be great. Awesome, very cool. All right, guys. Well, thank you for watching along. Wait, we got an extra comment there. Oh.
Link says, I'm loving the series about Plato, mind-expanding stuff. It's been too long since I've contemplated philosophy. This weekly practice is very much appreciated. Well, I appreciate your appreciation.
Fuck yeah.
Happy to share this very fun, classic, and very powerful piece of literature. I don't get tired of reminding people just how incredibly influential some of these ancient works are. And when you develop a personal command of their themes and their contents, you become a much more powerful speaker. You develop a command of arguments that you didn't have before. I was having fun with this. I need to write something more formal about this with gun control arguments and disarmament stuff. We talked about the argument with Plato. I mean, like at the very beginning of the Republic, the first question that gets asked is like, should you give arms back to someone who's not in their right mind? Which is like a tacit disarmament argument. But there is a version of an argument for disarmament you find in the Odyssey, where and some people will still unironically say this. They say the blade itself incites to deeds of violence. And on its face, it's kind of compelling. It's like, yeah, like you hold a really cool looking gun, it makes you kind of want to do stuff. But like, doesn't it? Yeah, it kind of does. And then, but if you've actually read the Odyssey, you get to you remember it, you can be like, you know, that was the argument that Odysseus made when he took the arms away from the suitors like a few minutes before he slaughtered them all. You know, just some context for that argument in its initial form. So the argument that Odysseus told Telemachus to make, saying, "Oh, I'm taking your arms away because you're drinking. You might hurt yourselves. It would disgrace our house. So I'm taking your arms away so you don't hurt each other." And then he and his father killed them all. It contextualizes the argument and it completely reframes that form of argument when even modern people bring it up, because that's its first instance. And that's the kind of rhetorical power that you can acquire when you, develop a familiarity with these texts. And like I said, I don't get tired of reminding people of that, because they are powerful, and people do make appeals to them. Yeah, often without realizing what they're appealing to.
Yeah, and it's a little bit. I mean, I hate the word esoteric because it usually means bullshit. But
esoteric's so abused. Yeah.
But I mean,
nuance
obviously,
much
like
better, unfortunately.
There are levels of like understanding and levels of knowledge, and you can talk in this inside club language because you know what you're talking about. Like you have this. You have the examples and so forth there. I mean, in the way that like I think I still have this. One of my favorite things. It was such a wink and a nod. Like you're so deep in the club to say "Vituteren heravat," which is the Old Norse for like you've heard enough. Would you yet know more? Which is what the Cirrus says, and it was like a joke between me and Clinton. Like we would write it back and forth to each other. Like I mean, I have to look it up how to write it. I don't know. But Vidutara and Hedavad, I think is what it was, and it's because it just becomes a joke. Would you yet know more? But it's this weird esoteric thing that like most people don't know about. But it's just fun when you have that kind of information, and we're getting some of that out of this. I mean,
but maybe that's all culture and
inside
all
jokes
and all language.
It absolutely is. All culture is inside jokes.
Yeah,
and culture starts with inside jokes. Yes.
And high culture is just more layers of jokes. There's this. Apologies to anyone if I'm repeating myself from previous episodes, but it was you who actually introduced me to the essay in one of your speeches, like decades back, a David Foster Wallace speech about television and about how television is stupid not because people are stupid, but because they are most developed and high in their tastes and values about wildly divergent things, and they're most common about their lowbrow prurient interests. So slapstick humor will always have a wide audience because you don't need highly developed tastes to appreciate it. And everyone's, highly developed tastes are about these like wildly different things.
Right.
So, but developing those high tastes are, I think, where you untap whole like layers of enjoyment that you didn't even know existed before, and it just makes life better.
Yeah.
No matter, even if people are going to mock you for being a nerd about it, it's still worth it.
All the cool people I know are nerds. So
Yeah.
that's just the way it is.
About something.
But anyway, guys, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening along and commenting and people. And thank you, people who are going to watch tomorrow and the next day or whatever, or listen on Spotify. Yeah, and I always should probably say, like, subscribe, and I believe it's Kent Peters, the jiu-jitsu guy, who says at the end of everything he does, buy my shit. We have many decals and T-shirts and books and things like that, and we're gonna have more. I'm working on this. This will have a patch, a Stay Solar patch. I'm having those made. It takes forever to get everything done, but yeah, we're working on stuff like that. So yeah, buy my shit. Anyway, all right, guys. See you next time. Stay solar.
Stay solar.